Kaylee Ann Polton was born on September 20th, 1989, in Rochester, New York. She was the only child in the family, and her parents gave her all their attention and love. When she turned 3, they decided to get divorced, and Kaylee stayed with her mom. Her father maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and visited his daughter all the time. Kaylee's mom, Judy, moved to an apartment complex located in a quiet suburban area of Rochester. Despite her ex-husband helping to take care of their daughter, Judy had some financial difficulties. When Kaylee was 4, her mom took on a part-time job to save up enough money for a trip to Disney World with her daughter the following summer. Judy's job was delivering magazines to customers in her neighborhood. On the evening of May 23, 1994, she was getting ready for her shift, sitting at home placing leaflets into the magazines before heading out to deliver them. Around 6:45 p.m., Kaylee asked to go out for a walk. It was a beautiful sunny evening outside, and she wanted to ride her bicycle. Judy looked outside and saw that there were plenty of other kids playing in the yard, so she agreed to let her daughter go out for a few minutes. She told her to stay within the yard, and Kaylee ran out onto the street with her bicycle. Judy had only a few minutes left to finish with the leaflets. After that, she planned to deliver the magazines and take Kaylee to McDonald's. Once she was done, she grabbed the magazines and took them to the car, planning to call Kaylee back home. But when Judy stepped outside, her daughter was nowhere to be found. Judy searched the area, calling out her daughter's name, but there was no response. She walked around the yard and then began to explore the complex grounds, but Kaylee was nowhere to be seen. The absence of the familiar creaking noise from her bicycle's wheels added to Judy's growing panic. Despite her cries attracting the attention of the neighbors, none of them had seen Kaylee since she was playing in the yard with other children. As the realization of Kaylee's disappearance sank in, the neighbors joined the search, but their efforts proved fruitless. The complex, surrounded by trees and a fence, seemed like an unlikely place for Kaylee to have wandered off on her own. Judy, fearing the worst, made the decision to contact the police. Within minutes, officers arrived and initiated a thorough search, enlisting the help of firefighters and canine units. Door-to-door searches were conducted, with the police focusing on the complex's residents as potential suspects if this was an abduction case. The residents cooperated willingly, allowing the police access to their apartments. However, despite their efforts, Kaylee and her bicycle remained elusive, leaving everyone concerned and desperate for answers. The search continued throughout the night, and at approximately 4 a.m., the case underwent a reclassification, now being treated as a kidnapping. A specialized unit took charge, and the detectives inquired with Judy about potential individuals in their lives who might harbor ill intentions towards them. They specifically inquired about Kaylee's father, but Judy dismissed any possibility of his involvement, as he had no conceivable motive to abduct his own daughter. The detectives then proceeded to ask if any residents within the complex had displayed peculiar or suspicious behavior. Judy shared an observation regarding a 22-year-old man named Mark, who had recently moved into the complex with his wife and young son, aged 1.5. According to Judy, Mark's conduct appeared highly unusual and even alarming. They had encountered each other a few times in the yard and engaged in casual conversations. On one occasion, he remarked on her daughter's beauty. Although Judy had received similar compliments in the past, the manner in which Mark expressed it struck her as peculiar. Furthermore, he made an even more unsettling statement, claiming to have been observing all the young girls in the complex, singling out Kaylee as the most attractive. Naturally, these words raised significant suspicion in the mother's mind. Consequently, she made an effort to avoid any further interaction with Mark, although they occasionally crossed paths in the yard. On one occasion, he posed a deeply concerning question to Judy, inquiring whether Kaylee would inform her if someone attempted to touch her. Judy responded affirmatively and promptly left the yard, deeming such inquiries highly suspicious. Prior to these conversations with Mark, Kaylee used to play with his son on the playground. However, since then, Judy prohibited her daughter from being in close proximity to him, even under her supervision. During her conversation with the detectives, Judy recollected another detail. A few minutes after she had ventured outside to search for her daughter, she spotted Mark in the yard, accompanying his son to the playground. She approached him and asked if he had seen Kaylee, to which he replied in the negative. Judy observed something peculiar, but in that moment she didn't give it much attention as her mind was consumed with fear for her daughter. She noticed that his sneakers were missing shoelaces. The detectives made the decision to interrogate Mark and brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Kaylee's vanishing and even consented to undergo a polygraph test. The examiner did not detect any deceptive responses, leading to Mark's release. Furthermore, Judy herself essentially provided him with an alibi, as she witnessed him at the playground with his son during the exact time she was searching for her daughter. The police also conducted a search of his apartment in the early stages of the investigation, but they did not discover Kaylee's bicycle or the girl herself. Consequently, Mark ceased to be considered a suspect, and the detectives continued their inquiry. With no viable leads, they began to investigate Judy for potential involvement in her daughter's disappearance. Judy understood that this was a standard procedure and cooperated by answering all their questions repeatedly. However, the fact that the police, lacking other suspects, were dedicating so much time to her only intensified her anguish. News about Kaylee's disappearance soon spread through local media, as well as billboards and flyers across the city. The police received an abundance of tips, surpassing 1,000 in number, and investigators promptly followed up on each one. Unfortunately, all of them turned out to be dead ends, resulting in the case going cold for several months. Despite the lack of progress, Judy never lost hope of finding her daughter alive. She resigned from her job and devoted all her time to the search. She diligently printed and distributed flyers, reached out to various media outlets, and did everything possible to keep the case in the public's consciousness. Some compassionate individuals also joined her cause, assisting not only with flyer distribution, but also managing to raise $100,000 as a reward for any valuable information regarding Kaylee's disappearance. Judy's efforts to find her daughter didn't go unnoticed. She managed to gain national attention for the case, appearing on the Oprah Winfrey Show and having the information about Kaylee's disappearance featured on a popular TV show dedicated to unsolved crimes. In addition, Judy collaborated with local businesses to ensure that flyers with information about Kaylee's disappearance were prominently displayed in their offices, establishments, and even on commercial vehicles. She even convinced 2 airlines to include these flyers in ticket envelopes. All of these efforts led to new leads, which the police diligently investigated. However, despite their best efforts, the case remained unsolved for 2 years. Then, on August 9, 1996, something unexpected happened. A woman called the police and revealed a shocking confession from her husband, Mark Christie, who happened to be Judy's neighbor. The police were surprised by the woman's story, but they faced a significant obstacle. According to state law, any information shared between spouses was protected and couldn't be used in court. This meant that even if Mark's confession was true, the police couldn't arrest or question him based on it. Furthermore, Mark's apartment had already been searched early in the investigation, and he had been seen in the yard with his child shortly after Kaylee's disappearance, raising doubts about his involvement. Despite these challenges, Detective Croft, who had listened to Mark's wife's story, decided to speak with him. He discovered that the man and his family had left Kaylee's complex shortly after her disappearance following serious allegations. It was revealed that Mark had been accused by the parents of 2 girls for being naked in his doorway, visible to all. Although no investigation was carried out due to the fact that he was technically in his own home, the detective found the situation highly suspicious. Mark had relocated to a city 50 miles away from Rochester, prompting Croft to follow. However, upon arrival, he was greeted by an unexpected turn of events. Instead of Mark, his mother answered the door and informed Croft that her son would only speak to the police in the presence of a lawyer whom they had already contacted. It appeared that Mark had been informed about his wife's call to the authorities, leading Croft to realize his limited options. Since any confession made to his spouse could not be used in court, Mark's attorney could easily prevent the police from questioning him, allowing Mark to avoid prosecution. Nevertheless, Croft was not prepared to give up just yet. While conversing with Mark's mother, the man himself eventually emerged, and the detective successfully persuaded him to answer a few questions regarding Kaylee's case. Croft proposed they continue their discussion over coffee at a nearby restaurant. Surprisingly, Mark agreed, under the condition that the detective would take him to his lawyer afterwards. They settled at a nearby Italian restaurant, where Croft engaged in light conversation with Mark, avoiding any form of coercion. This approach proved effective as Mark eventually opened up. He expressed remorse for his actions towards Kaylee, admitting that her disappearance had weighed heavily on his conscience for the past 2 years. He confessed that he was tormented by constant reminders of Kaylee in the media and on flyers, her face haunting him wherever he went. Croft proceeded with caution, being mindful not to startle Mark with too much pressure. Despite their long history together since the beginning of the investigation, Croft knew that this conversation was crucial. He sensed that Mark took pride in outsmarting the police and avoiding consequences. To leverage this, Croft decided to stroke Mark's ego by acknowledging his successful deception of the entire investigative team. This tactic proved effective as Mark, although hesitant to boast, admitted that his method of disposing of the bicycle was indeed clever. Mark offered to share the details but made it clear that he would only discuss the bicycle and nothing more. Croft maintained a gentle and amicable demeanor to keep Mark at ease and extract as much information as possible, assuring him that he could refrain from discussing any topics he wished to avoid. Mark then disclosed that Kaylee's bicycle had been concealed in his apartment for 3 days following her disappearance. Aware that the police could search any residence without a warrant in cases involving endangered children, Mark exploited a legal loophole. He dismantled the bicycle and concealed its parts in various locations around his apartment that were obviously too small to accommodate a child. Some pieces were wrapped in clothing and stashed in closets, while others were placed in small bags and transported to his car. Mark then disposed of the parts gradually, taking them far away from his residence. Although police officers were stationed at the complex exit scrutinizing vehicles, they were solely focused on locating the missing girl, overlooking the inconspicuous small bags. Detective Croft realized that Mark's detailed account provided a significant opportunity to elicit a full confession. He started to explain to him that maybe Kaylee's death wasn't his fault, and it was a tragic accident. Mark inquired about the potential sentence he could receive, to which Croft suggested it would likely be around 25 years. Mark expressed his belief that it would be unjust to spend half his life in prison, away from his family. He mentioned that he had been going through his own personal hell for the past 2 years, which should be taken into consideration during sentencing. Despite the lack of logic in Mark's words, Croft persisted with his approach and advised Mark to alleviate his suffering by revealing the truth. Mark agreed to confess, but only after consulting with a lawyer. The detective acknowledged that no attorney would advise their client to confess without evidence against them. He informed Mark that in such a scenario, Kaylee's parents would never know the truth about their daughter's fate. Mark then disclosed, "She didn't suffer." Sensing Mark's readiness to come clean, the detective urged him to do the right thing for himself, his family, and his faith. Mark finally admitted to strangling Kaylee, emphasizing that he had not harmed her in any other way. He recounted how Kaylee had visited his apartment that evening to play with his young son. Mark took her bike to the kitchen to avoid attracting attention, knowing that Kaylee's mother wouldn't approve of her being there. Kaylee went upstairs to the children's room, where she interacted with the child. When Judy called out for her daughter from the yard, Mark panicked. Upon realizing that the girl's mother would be furious about him letting her into his house without permission, Mark made his way to the children's room and strangled Kaylee with his bare hands. Detective Croft harbored doubts about certain aspects of the narrative. It appeared more plausible that Mark enticed Kaylee into his apartment under the guise of playing with his son, exploiting his wife's absence at work. It was possible that he attempted to assault her, and upon hearing Judy's voice, he panicked at the thought of Kaylee revealing the truth. The detective recalled Judy spotting him outside in laceless sneakers, indicating their potential use in the crime. This suggested premeditation, as he would have had time to remove the laces. Mark seemed to be downplaying the severity of his actions by altering details, but Croft knew that voicing his suspicions might prompt Mark to clam up about the body's whereabouts. To extract crucial information, the detective played along, listening to Mark's account. Mark claimed to have left Kaylee's body in the kitchen after the murder, taking his son outside to establish an alibi. He intentionally made himself visible to Judy in the yard to dispel any doubts. Amid the chaos of the search for Kaylee, Mark placed her body in a laundry basket, concealing it with clothes. Subsequently, he moved the basket to his car trunk, unnoticed amidst the commotion. Taking his son along, Mark drove to his workplace as a security guard. Mark's story didn't end there. Despite being sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison for the murder, Mark's lawyer was able to negotiate a deal where his client had the kidnapping charges dropped. This meant that Mark would only face punishment for the murder. However, the repercussions of his actions continued to haunt him. 2 years later, the police decided to revisit the case. They went to Mark's workplace and opened the tank where he had disposed of Kaylee's body. To their surprise, they found that the victim's body was still inside. However, due to the advanced state of decomposition, experts were unable to determine the cause of death or any other details. The only thing they could confirm was the victim's identity, finally bringing closure to Judy, Kaylee's mother. She was able to bury her daughter and find some solace in knowing the truth. Meanwhile, Mark's lawyer tried to withdraw his confession, but his efforts were in vain. Mark had provided all the information voluntarily, and Detective Croft had followed the law throughout the investigation. There was no way to undo the damage that had been done. Mark admitted his guilt to the judge, accepting the consequences of his actions. He was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison, just as Detective Croft had predicted. Despite his remorse and realization that killing Kaylee was a grave mistake, Mark had to face the harsh reality of his choices. In 2010, the police revisited a cold case from 1988 involving the brutal murder of 74-year-old Viola Manville in a Rochester suburb. Despite having multiple suspects, including 16-year-old Mark, who passed a polygraph test, a man named Frank Sterling was eventually arrested. Initially denying his involvement, Frank confessed after an intense overnight interrogation. Despite his efforts to appeal his conviction, new DNA evidence in 2010 pointed to Mark Christie, who eventually confessed to the murder in 2011. Mark received an additional 28 years in prison, but showed no remorse. Frank, wrongfully imprisoned for 19 years, sued and received compensation in 2014, only to pass away 3 years later. Mark remains incarcerated, with a possibility of parole in the future, but nothing is certain. Mary Jane Croft Van Gilder was born on November 19, 1911, in Fairmont, West Virginia. She tied the knot with her husband James Wesley Van Gilder on January 29, 1929. Following the stillbirth of their twins in 1935, Mary gave birth to their fifth child before the outbreak of World War II. However, her marriage to James faced difficulties, leading Mary to move to the Van Gilder family farm in 1943. The reasons behind their separation remain unclear, but Mary claimed that her husband was both alcoholic and abusive, although her children dispute these allegations. In 1944, Mary relocated to Plymouth, Ohio, where she secured a job as a forklift operator at the Wilkins Air Force Depot in Shelby. Despite not owning a vehicle, she relied on her co-workers for transportation to and from work. Even after moving to Ohio, Mary maintained contact with her children by sending them war bonds, letters, and clothes. War bonds are a government initiative to finance military operations and expenditures by issuing debt for public purchase. Her children remain unaware of the reasons behind her departure and separation. Mary's eldest daughter, Anna Mae von Gilder Rager, stated, "In 1945, my mother sued my dad for divorce, which made me think she was wanting to get married again, but we found no answer to that." In 1945, Mary Jane sent a letter to West Virginia, requesting her children to return the war bonds to her in Plymouth. A few weeks later, she sent them her final war bond. This marked the last communication her family ever received from Mary Jane. James filed for divorce a few months later, but Mary never responded. When she failed to appear in court, her attorney withdrew her divorce petition in April 1946. James was ultimately granted the divorce and full custody of the children by a West Virginia judge. By 1949, Mary's eldest daughter, Anna, began searching for her mother. It wasn't until May 5, 1952, that she discovered her mother had left her job at the Wilkins Air Force Depot on March 8, 1945, citing added household duties as the reason for her departure. Despite never being officially reported missing, Anna, the daughter of Mary Van Gilder, continued her search for her mother. In 2004, Anna stumbled upon a new lead when a newspaper in Ohio published an article about their quest to find Mary. A man who had read the article reached out to Anna via email, revealing that his father had worked with Mary during the years 1943 to 1945. Unfortunately, they had no information about Mary's whereabouts after that period. It wasn't until April 2018 that Anna's daughter, Mary's granddaughter, finally reported Mary as missing to the police. Adam Turner, the investigating officer, empathized with Anna's pain and the overwhelming need to uncover the truth. He understood that the uncertainty of not knowing is far more agonizing than having concrete answers. Determined to solve the case, Adam obtained Mary's military personnel file and made it available online in the hopes of generating leads. It was then that a civilian sleuth came across a name, Percy L. Sebrin, on a document within the file, which turned out to be crucial in unraveling the mystery. Mary had taken over Sebrin's position as a high-lift fork operator and likely received training from him. Adam delved into Sebrin's history and discovered that he had passed away in Kansas City, Missouri, in 1969. He was married to a woman named Mary Jane Sebrin, born on November 19, 1911, and who had died in 1990. Both were laid to rest in Forest, Louisiana, after Sebrin tragically lost his life in a train accident. The couple resided in Arkansas and had 2 children, with their first child being born in December 1945, just 9 months after Mary Van Gilder left her job at the Wilkins Air Force Depot. Adam then contacted one of Sebrin's grandchildren, who promptly provided him with photographs of Mary Jane Sebrin and a document containing her signature. Upon comparing Mary Jane Sebrin's signature with that of Mary Jane Van Gilder, Adam noticed distinct similarities in letter shapes and formatting. The photographs revealed a remarkable similarity between Mary Jane Sebrin and Mary Jane Van Gilder. In February 2024, a DNA test definitively established that Mary Jane Sebrin was indeed Mary Jane Van Gilder. As per her grandchildren from her second family, Mary Jane was an extraordinary grandmother who had a deep passion for gardening, particularly for hydrangeas. She took pleasure in sipping sun tea and had exceptional culinary skills. Surprisingly, it was discovered that Mary had been using a different Social Security number than the one recorded in her military file. Mary passed away in 1990 due to colon cancer and was cremated, with her ashes laid to rest beside her husband. During her final moments, Mary Jane confided in one of her granddaughters, hinting at a secret she could never disclose. Initially, her granddaughter dismissed it as nonsensical rambling, but now everything fell into place. Adam, expressing the Van Gilder family's anguish, revealed that uncovering the truth about Mary Jane's fate had been a painful journey spanning several decades. The case of Mary Jane would bring forth 2 additional enigmas. While searching for Mary Jane, Officer Adam Turner stumbled upon a record of an unidentified woman, Jane Doe, found in Preble County during the 1960s. The description of Jane Doe bore a resemblance to Mary Jane Van Gilder, prompting the exhumation of the remains in late 2019 for DNA testing. However, the results did not match Mary Jane's DNA. Nevertheless, the detective resolved to continue his investigation and determine the true identity of Jane Doe. Collaborating with Moxie Forensic Investigations, they developed a DNA profile and employed genetic genealogy to crack the case. Astonishingly, the Preble County Jane Doe turned out to be Albert Frost, a man from Hamilton, Ohio, who had been missing since the early 1960s. Albert's body had decomposed extensively, scattered over a distance of approximately 75 feet, which likely contributed to the misidentification. The cause of his death remains undetermined. Upon contacting Albert's closest DNA relative, his great-niece, Tina Barrett, another mystery began to unfold. Tina was under the impression that they were talking about her great-aunt Clara without knowing about Albert's existence. As it turned out, there were two siblings missing from the same family. Clara had a brother named Albert, who also went missing and was never found. Clara disappeared in the 1950s when she was in her early 20s, about 10 years before Albert. Family members revealed that Clara's mother had essentially sold her to a man who later became her husband. They had two children together, who were very young when Clara disappeared. Clara's family suspected foul play in her disappearance and informed the authorities that her husband had been abusive towards her. However, Clara's husband denied any involvement in her disappearance, claiming that she had simply left. After Clara vanished, her husband remarried and relocated to Pennsylvania with their children. Clara's husband, who has since passed away, remains a suspect in her disappearance.